So yesterday, Venerable Samten shared with us about a wonderful gathering of Buddhist women in Korea at the Sakyadhita conference. And today I wanted to share with you my own meeting with remarkable Buddhist women in the Sravasti Abbey library. So this is a really lovely book that we have in the poetry section. It's entitled Daughters of Emptiness, Poems of Chinese Buddhist Nuns. And they're beautifully translated by a Dr. Beata Grant. I mean, just the whole project of finding these poems, I think they span from, is it the 3rd century all the way through to the modern age. You know, finding these poems by nuns and then having to translate them from classical Chinese is no mean feat. So I was enjoying this book, and I came across a poem that really made me sit up. And it's by a Chinese bhikshuni of the modern times. Her name is Longlian. And the title of the poem is To the English Nun Nawang Chodron on Her Pilgrimage to Lhasa. And when I saw this, I was like, what? You know, this Chinese nun, how did she meet this English? She's actually also, she's American, I think. She's one of the first Western bhikshunis in the Nyingma tradition and Tibetan Buddhism. How did they even meet? And how did one wind up writing a poem to another? So I'll just share the poem and then what little I know of their lives as a source of inspiration. And I think we can maybe guess at how they actually met. So, to the English nun, Nawang Chodron, on her pilgrimage to Lhasa. Alone she traverses 10,000 li across the billowing waves, her resolve unbreakable, undaunted by the hardships of travel. Snowy peaks turning in the blue, the willow of the princess. The sea clouds imprinted with red, the plantain of the beauty. The 9 provinces share a dream, the land of Huaxu. Side by side, we practice emptiness, the bridge of Jingjian. 100 homes within the 4 seas understand the Buddha's words. The road to the Pure Land here in the human world is not so far away. So there's a lot of symbolism, and I'm not going to spend time unpacking the poem, but basically it says here, Huaxu was the name of a land said to have been visited by the Yellow Emperor in his dreams. So it's kind of like, I guess, a dream of unity of all these different provinces of China. And similarly, for nuns of different cultures, they're united by the bridge of Jingjian, who was the first, said to be the first woman in China who received the full ordination. So how they were connected like that across times and spaces and cultures. So just a little bit about these nuns. Bhikshuni Longlian, the writer of this poem, is said to be the most outstanding bhikshuni in modern China. She was given that accolade, I think, by the president of the Buddhist Association. And she was born in 1909, and before she ordained, she had a very illustrious career. She was the first woman in Sichuan to pass the civil service examinations and actually work in the government of Sichuan province. And she had the good fortune to meet very eminent Buddhist teachers of that time. She studied with the Venerable Fazun and Venerable Nenghai, who both had gone to Gelugpa monasteries in Tibet to study. She also studied with the 7th Jangya and also a Venerable Sherab Gyatso, who I'm not so familiar with. So, you know, in Sichuan, it was like a hotbed of Sino-Tibetan activity, and she did all this study as a laywoman, and it came to the point where she decided, you know, she wanted to ordain. So at the age of 32, she ordained, and she eventually became the abbess of one of the Venerable Nenghai's monasteries. But most unfortunately, as we know, under the communist Chinese rule of China, then religion became, all religious people were persecuted. And she came to have to go to labor reform camp because she was a very eminent Buddhist teacher, right? So they did not imprison her or torture her, but she did have to go and participate in confession sessions, and she was sent to work in a textile factory. At the same time, she was still allowed to live in the monastery. I think her nunnery was converted into, I'm not sure, it was not allowed to function as a nunnery, basically. But there was a little portion that the nuns could still live in. So she was made to grow out her hair and wear lay clothes and work at the labor factory, you know, at the labor reform camp. But of course, she continued to keep her vows and practice, waiting. I think something like 10 years passed like that. It was extremely difficult. But in 1979, the moment that she sensed that there was a shift in the political situation, and there was actually a meeting of the Chinese Buddhist Association, she was one of the first to shave her hair off again and wear robes, and she shows up at the meeting, and people were like, because they hadn't seen anyone in monastic garb for that long. Yeah, and the first thing she did was to request to restore her nunnery and rebuild the Buddhist Institute. And she wanted very much to revive the full ordination. And she's in her biography, it said that was her greatest accomplishment. So in 1979, the first thing she did was to give Shikshamana ordination to 9 nuns. And then in 1982, eventually, she got the conditions together. There was a supportive monks community near them, and they gave the full ordination to those 9 nuns, the dual Sangha ordination. And so she continued to do that. And one of her greatest dreams was to help revive the full ordination for the Sri Lankan nuns. She even had the rites translated into English. She had her nuns rehearse. But due to political situations, it was not possible for a delegation from Sri Lanka to enter at that time. Yeah. So I was an eminent scholar, and just trained so many nuns in China. And the amazing thing is in 2016, when Venerable Chodron was in Taiwan to receive the Bhikshuni Award, there were nuns from her nunnery in the group. We just didn't know. Looking back, I was like, oh, we should have talked to them. Yeah. So that's the Bhikshuni Longlian, who did a lot for the nuns in modern China. And then this Bhikshuni Nawang Chodron, who's English, also had an illustrious lay life before she ordained. She was born Marilyn Silverstone, and her family, I think her father ran United Artists and 20th Century Fox. So she's basically, I guess, Hollywood royalty, right? And she was an eminent photojournalist. She was one of the first women to make it into Magnum Photos, which I understand is a very big deal if you take photos. So, and she was the one who took photos of His Holiness the Dalai Lama when he first got off the train in India. So her photos made it to the lead of Life magazine. And I think that must have been how she met the Buddha Dharma. There's a very beautiful photo essay that she did called 5 Nyingmapa Lamas in Sikkim. So she must have been assigned to interview them. And I actually found that photo essay on the web. And you sense that, I think that changed her life. I mean, I'm guessing so. Just from the way she presented, it was a very intimate portrait of these lamas in exile, doing their practice and how they were training the next generation of tukus. So I found it quite beautiful. So from meeting the lamas, she meets the Dharma, and she starts to study with the Khenpo Rahor Thubten, who was the tutor of the 7th Dzogchen Rinpoche. And after her partner passes away, then she moved to Nepal to study with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. So I have no idea how she wound up taking the Bhikshuni ordination, what inspired her, or what was it her teacher, but she does. In 1987, she was one of these first Western Bhikshunis to go to Hong Kong to take the full ordination there. So, I mean, before her, there was already Frida Bedi, Venerable Kechok Palmo, then there was Jatsuma Tenzin Palmo, also Venerable Pema Chodron, and also Venerable Soltrim Palmo. All of them took ordination in Hong Kong at the same 1-week program that Venerable Nawang Chodron went for. And interestingly, she stayed on to observe a longer ordination program that same year in Hong Kong. That was, I think, almost 3 months. I'm not sure. It could have been that long, but it was long. A long training program done by the Polin Monastery. And that's where Venerable Jamyang Wangmo, is that her name? Went. And there were also 4 Tibetan nuns there at that ordination from the Frida Bedi's nunnery. So it was a big ordination and long one in Hong Kong. So she went there as an observer. And someone who went there sent me some pictures. So I think she was very inspired by that, because eventually in 1993, Venerable Nawang Chodron brought 11 nuns from Bhutan back to that ordination and served as their translator, or to try and help them be part of that program from the Shechen nunnery. So well before the historic Bhutanese ordination we heard about yesterday, there were seeds kind of trying to get planted. The 11 nuns went back to Bhutan, but the ordination and Bhikshuni training and lineage didn't take off. But at least this was like the first attempt. And it seems that at that 1993 ordination, she met with some very eminent nuns from China, made a very strong connection, and then from there she went to China to start to observe Varsa, to train with the nuns there, and perhaps that's how she met the Bhikshuni Longlian. But she also dedicated her life to supporting nuns, especially at the Shechen nunnery, and also the monks there as well. Yeah, so I was just so touched to see this, point of connection between these nuns from different cultures, but with the same aspiration, as it says in the poem, deeply connected by the deepest spiritual yearnings, wishing to support each other's practice and to bring about the flourishing of the Bhikshuni Sangha in the world. And I just wanted to end with a little correction, though, because one time I gave a BBC talk about how the first Chinese nun was Jing Jian. And then Ayatata Loka wrote to me and said, well, she's done this incredible dissertation collecting the lives of nuns from different cultures. And she said there's a source that says she may not have been the first one. Yeah, there's a record of earlier ordination. So it took me some time to finally locate it in the Chinese. So I'm going to give you a very, very rough kind of translation of what it says. It's from a text called A Grove of Pearls and the Garden of Dharma. It's a Buddhist encyclopedia that was compiled in the 7th century. So it records the history of ordination in China. So it says that in the middle of the 1st century, there were only 2 monastics who traveled to China from, I think, the western regions, India and the Central Asia. And so it says it was not possible to give full ordination. Nonetheless, they taught the Dharma to lay people who shaved their heads, wore plain robes, and received 5 or 10 precepts. Then it says, for over 100 years, only the 3 refuges, 5 precepts, and the 10 precepts were transmitted. So we get into the middle of the 2nd century. Then it says, 5 monastics came from North China to India and gave the full ordination to monks. Okay. Then we get into sometime like in the 3rd. Then there's a little account of how the monks translated the Vinaya and started to propagate it. In the 3rd century, it says, at that time, nuns came to request the full ordination. A monk said to them, as the Vinaya says, the only exception in a border area is for 5 bhikshus to give the full ordination to monks. The nuns returned in disappointment. Is it overwhelmed with emotions? Their tears fell like the rain. Then after that, it says, 2 bhikshunis came from East India to Chang'an. They saw the Chinese nuns and asked them, who did you receive the precepts from? The nuns responded, we received only the 5 precepts and the 10 precepts from the Bhikshu Sangha. The 2 bhikshunis sighed. The nuns in the border area do not receive full ordination. They returned to their country and gathered 15 people to travel to China. 3 froze to death on the snowy mountain. 2 fell into an abyss and died. The rest arrived in China. There were only 10 people. The nuns returned to the capital to give the full precepts and traveled to other areas to do so as well. Then the Indian nuns wished to return home. 7 of them returned by boat. 3 others had died in China. They were away for more than 17 years. So, yeah, just to think about what it takes to get fully ordained. Reading all this, especially now we have such sincere aspirants here at the Abbey, all trying to create the causes for full ordination. Those of you who are here will see every evening there are people reciting special prayers for that purpose, doing extra practices, really dedicating their practice for this purpose. Some people have waited, 5-6 years because of COVID. In the grand scheme of things, it's not that long. We can think about all the nuns and monks actually in China who for 25 years at least, there was a ban on ordinations, since 1957, I think. It took 25 years before the next ordination was given. And then likewise for the Bhutanese nuns, right, who finally received full ordination last year, right, between 93 to that time. And then the whole history of the transmission of the Buddha Dharma. In China, it took 3 centuries before they began to ordain nuns. If this source is accurate, So, we can be so grateful to this incredible lineage of monks, nuns, who for centuries have kept the lineage of precepts alive and continue to support and practice with each other across cultures. We are part of that stream of transmission.
I think there's an article about Nawang Chodron.
Oh, right.
Blossoms of the Dharma.
Yes. Oh.
in 1996 when we had the program in Bodh Gaya, Life as a Western Buddhist Nun, Venerable Nawang Chodron came. And many of the nuns there gave talks in the evening, and a book was made called Blossoms of the Dharma, and her talk was in it.
So this is not for the BBC, but it's just a nerdy historical note. On a total side note, like the first ordination that happened again in modern China for the monks, they used the Mula Savastivada rite. Yeah, so it's like, what? And I think it was out of respect for one of these eminent monks who had been a very strong Sino-Tibetan teacher, had recently passed away. I mean, I wrote to a monk in China asking him, why did they use the Mula Savastivada rite for the first ordination in modern China for the monks? And he thought it was because one of the Sino-Tibetan... Yeah, I know, I read it in this Buddhist journal. I was like, really? So I wrote to... So his best guess is that this great teacher had passed away and they wanted to honor his work in the Mula Savastivada Vinaya. Anyhow.